So, caller, welcome to the show. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Hey,
There we
William,
go.
my name is James from Florida. I called in twice, and it's on your voicemail. I want to try to get through now, but anyway, let me get to the point. In Zechariah 6:13, the KJV translation of the Bible renders that scripture as the Messiah taking his seat as both a king and priest. And in the Tanakh, it is translated as the Messiah taking his throne, and the Levitical high priest taking his throne. And if you look at reality is that the temple was destroyed, and there was no high priest and Messiah sitting together in the unity of peace. And so I'm wondering, Zechariah, either the Tanakh translation is inaccurate here, or the KJV translation is inaccurate. And if you look at Psalms 110, it shows what the Christians believe, the Messiah sitting at the right hand of God, ruling as both king and priest after the order of Melchizedek, which allows him, that order allows him to both king and priest, as was Melchizedek. So, what do you think? I mean, doesn't this prove the KJV in this particular passage is more accurate?
Okay, there we go. All right, Rabbi, you're going to take this one for sure. This is I hear this a lot. The best argument I've ever, not best, but the funniest argument I ever heard, and I will not mention who said it, was I was on a phone call for about 20 minutes with the fellow, and I kept mentioning the Hebrew over and over again, and he argued hard every single thing I said. I mean, totally took it to court, right? At the end of the phone call, you will not believe what he asked me. He said, "Why do you keep mentioning Hebrew? What is that?" I was like, "You sit there and argued with me like tooth and nail all the way through this thing about something you had no clue about. Insane." Rabbi, take it away.
In almost any argument, whether it has to do with the Bible or social issues, the things that we see in the political sphere, I frequently can understand both sides of both interlocutors, both positions, and I usually have a view and a strong view, but I get what they're saying. I could wrap my brain around what they're saying. No matter how much I disagree with the point, I get what they're asking or what's on their mind. I have to concede that this is one of those exceptions where someone could suggest that a translation, a 17th century translation of Tanakh, could be superior to the original Hebrew. That's one I can't even wrap my frontal lobe around, because the translation is a man-made instrument, and its whole purpose is to render the original. In the case of the King James Bible, it was commissioned in the very early 17th century. 47 men of the Church of England sat and translated, and I use that word loosely, the Tanakh, the Hebrew scriptures, into English, and they claimed they did the best that they could. They were bright people and good writers. They've corrupted Tanakh in a number of places, but I don't want to go there right now. But to say that a translation can be superior to an original, my vocabulary isn't extensive enough to that claim is so vacuous, is so void of any explicable explanation. In the country, I don't know who you are, but you sound like an American. In the country you live in, there's the law of best evidence. The law of best evidence states that it is the original contract that is relevant to evidence, not translations of those contracts. A translation of a contract can never be superior to the original. How could someone come to believe this? How could so that's the part I can't wrap my head around. And the question becomes crazy. Here's a mild point. The King James version that you're reading now is not the 1611 King James. I know that surprises many, but I happen to own the 1611 King James because in 1911 the original plates were taken out and the 1611 King James was reprinted. And I got it. So I saw what the King James looked like. It doesn't look like what it looks like today. It's almost, I can't say it's not readable, but it's bordering on that. It's not just that they're using language we don't use. And it's not just the grammar has changed dramatically from the King James. That the King James's language is a Jacobean English. So it was very, very, very different grammar and very different use of grammatical signs. Just word turns. It's just really quite different. And the King James was revised quite a number of times, not once, not twice, but quite a number of times until the version you have today. Well, which one of those is better than Tanakh? It was revised in the 18th century. Is that the one that was revised again in the 19th century? Which revision is? So I would just say to you that if you can possibly believe that a translation could be superior to the original, I would say to you that you need to really get advice on that, really meditate on that. It's inconsistent. I can't even understand how someone can believe that. The problem with that kind of thinking becomes even more preposterous. And I'm trying to be gentle. I know the person who called in is a sincere Christian, so I don't want to. This person who called in is not may have never met a Jew in his life. I don't know. As it turns out, I did what some people do, but I imagine the majority don't do, and that is there's a preface to the King James Version that is written by the authors themselves. As I said, we have slightly less than 4 dozen people responsible for the King James, and they talk about the inadequacy of their translation and the limitations of their own translation. And what is germane is they also essentially dismiss the Septuagint, the Greek translation, and say that rather than relying on a Greek translation, which they refer to, these are my words, you'd have to read it yourself, is defective, and they say it has to be defective because the Septuagint was revised over and over and over again. If it was such a terrific translation, why would they have to keep revising it? I've taught you that in previous shows, and these people, members in good standing of the Church of England, believe me, were not fans of Rabbi Tovia Singer. So they're saying that, they're describing the challenges. So how is it that people could be convinced in the pews of America that convinced of claims about the King James that even the translators don't make? And I think, I know this is not the heart of your question. I'm going to get into it in just a moment. And I ask, where is it? Because I assume that you're a rational person. You're mentally well. You're okay. Like, Why would this be attractive? And I can only draw one conclusion. And Christians have no access to the Hebrew. It's not because they're dumb, stupid. It's because it's not part of the Christian education. For a known reason, the church would recognize that knowledge of Hebrew is dangerous and would not teach their children the Hebrew language in schools in Texas and Arkansas and Kansas with very large Christian populations with an inordinate number of schools, Christian schools, for kids. They're not teaching children the Hebrew language. How odd. They're not teaching the children the language that the Tanakh was written in. And they believe, and I believe they believe that it's the Word of God. Why would you teach a kid Latin? Why? Why? And then later might learn Greek, but never Hebrew. Yes. Eventually, when you're 20 years old, you go to full theological seminary, Philadelphia College of Bible. I've lectured there. I think they're still in Langhorne, Pennsylvania. Dallas Theological. Then you could take Biblical Hebrew and Moody and so on. But at that point, you're 20 years old when you just started. You're totally sold on Christianity. So it's not. The idea is to equip children with that knowledge so they could read it for themselves. And a translation is a commentary. This is not a throwaway line. If I could take Hebrew's my native language, I was learning Hebrew before. My knowledge of Hebrew was better than my English when I was a little kid. So if I could put a cassette in your mind and copy over so you would speak biblical Hebrew and understand it fluently and write it fluently, and I then asked you to translate the Hebrew Bible into English, you would have to add words, many words, in order for the words to make sense. And you'd have to rearrange the text because Hebrew does not have the relationship with English as does Spanish and Portuguese, that are part of the same family. It's another family entirely. There are many words that just aren't used in Tanakh, but are implied that have to be added in. And in case you're not sure of this, if you open up any book that has Hebrew English on it, just try it. And so you have English on one side, you have Hebrew on the other side. Look at just the size of the font size of the letters, and you'll see that the Hebrew letters are just much larger than the English letters, much larger. Moreover, count how many words there are in a passage on the English side and the Hebrew side. Way more words on the English side. You just need a lot more to put in there. So, therefore, any translation is merely a commentary. And people who think that the King James is wholly divine, please don't be offended, but this is complete insanity. No one can think such a thing. No one could imagine so. And the King James was basing their translation not just on their own translations, but translations that preceded it. Tyndale, Bishop's Bible, they were highly reliant on that. So were they all. All right. So this is all craziness. I don't usually use those words because who do I want to offend? But I hope that something I've said, and I'm speaking to the Christian right now, would make some sense to you. Some sense to you. If an English document, if the Declaration of Independence, the primary author, Thomas Jefferson, if someone translated into Chinese, how could someone possibly believe that a Chinese translation, and there are Chinese translations of the Declaration of Independence, how could you believe that that Chinese translation is superior to what Thomas Jefferson wrote? You can't believe that. Okay, so let's end that one. Now let's actually go to the passages you were referring to, and that's Zechariah chapter 6. Zechariah lived. This is going to be germane to the topic being discussed. Zechariah lived, he was one of three prophets that lived at the very beginning of the building of the second temple. He was there before it was built and as it was being built. The same thing could be said of Haggai and, of course, Malachi. They all were the true latter prophets. In fact, referring to Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and other books like that, Hosea, as latter prophets is a complete mistake. People do that, and it's a mistake that began in the 15th century. These are the only three prophets that are truly the latter prophets. And here, the second temple is set to be built. The children of Israel have returned back to the land of Israel. Babylon has been destroyed, as prophesied in Jeremiah 25, verse 12, and all over. Jeremiah is that Babylon is done, and it really, it's one of the, I want to use the word miracle, but it's one of the, it's a mysteries of history of how that even happened. The Babylonian Empire was enormous, and for the Persian Empire to destroy, for Cyrus the Great to just destroy the Babylonian Empire in the blink of an eye, historians can't to this day explain how that could have possibly occurred. It did. We have a Bible that said so, and we love the Bible. When we say we love the Bible, we love Tanakh, we love the Jewish scriptures, because what happened is really inexplicable. You could begin to explain how Alexander the Great defeated the Persians, beginning with a very important battle called the Battle of Granicus in 334 BCE, in which Alexander the Great himself fought. And we can really know a lot about how that happened. How did he manage to defeat? How did the king of Macedon manage to defeat Darius? We really know a lot about that. And that was the first of three major battles. We really know very little about how the Babylonian Empire was defeated. So the Jews are told by Cyrus to go back to Eretz Israel to build the temple. Cyrus knew that he was to behave that way because he had a passage in the book of Isaiah where Cyrus is told that this is his mandate, and Cyrus fulfilled it for the Jews, and we know now for other nations as well. And the children of Israel, not many, only 42,360 Jews, read Ezra chapter 2. We know who their families are. They're all enumerated in this very long chapter that contains a copious list of every family that were part of that first thrust of Jews. Probably millions have remained behind in Babylon, and they're now set to build a Jerusalem and the temple, and they begin that project. Just a piece of history. It would not be long for Cyrus's decree to be rescinded, and they would have to wait roughly 18 years until completing it, completing the building of the second temple, and that's what the book of Nehemiah is largely consumed with. And Ezra and Nehemiah is really one book. Okay, Cyrus gives that command 52 years after the destruction of the first temple. There are two leaders, great men, who lead the return of the Jewish people to their land. Again, this relatively small group of people, less than 50,000 people. And those two people, they're addressed here, and they're addressed back in Zechariah chapter 3 as two people. One, his name is Yehoshua ben Yehotzadok. Yehotzadok was the son of the high priest from the first temple, named Sariah, and Yehotzadok is a very famous older brother named Ezra. So Ezra's nephew is the high priest of the first high priest of the second temple. There would be many that were subsequent ones, but this is very important. And then you have another man, and that's who the branch is. There is no mention of the Messiah in the King James or any other James in Zechariah chapter 6. I don't even know what you're talking about. So if you look through a King James Bible of Zechariah chapter 6, you're not going to find the word Messiah. So I don't know what you're referring to. So let's wrap up what's really going on here and what is mortally wrong with the Christian claim that leads so many people astray. So the two leaders of this relatively small group of Jews, they're referred to as the Shevei Tzion, those who returned to Zion to build the second commonwealth. They're enumerated because they were really so loyal to God in the sense that they loved the land and they came to rebuild it, although in many senses, in many ways, they were not fully observant, violated Shabbos, married women who were not Jewish, but they really loved the land, very much like the early Zionists in the current state of Israel. Most were not religious, but had a great love for the land of Israel, and that's why it's in there. Now, the key point is that we know the word that's used there is semach. Semach means a branch. And that we know who builds the sanctuary. So all you have to do is go back to Zechariah 3, verse um, 8, 9, 10. We see there who the branch is, and we see in that chapter it's the person who's going to build the sanctuary. And here again, there's a reference made to the tzemach. So the word there is not Mashiach. The word there is the branch. Now, as you know, the word branch is used about the Messiah, and it's used about people who are descendants of the house of David. As it turns out, Yehoshua ben Yehosadok's partner, the other great man who led this return, was none other than Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel was a direct descendant of the house of David, straight down. And he's called Zerubbabel because he was seated in Babylon, meaning he was conceived in Babel. He wasn't born in the land of Israel. Why is it? And he and Yeshua together. That's what these books are all about, is the building of the second temple. It's more than that, but it's about that. And why are the Messiah is also called a branch? Why are people who are from the house of David called a branch? If I were to assemble a committee which had to let's come up with the best name for the Messiah, I think that branch would probably not there wouldn't be that many. Let's go with branch. Branch sounds like a great name for a Messiah. Oh, branch is a great name for someone from the house of David. I think we would come up with other creative names. So, Tanakh is being really quite literal here. What does it mean by a branch? To give you a hint, what is the root? We know that from Isaiah chapter 11, verse 1. The root is Jesse. So let's think about that. Jesse, he's the father of King David. He is the root. You ever see a tree? Imagine a big oak tree. And you wonder, how does this huge tree stay up there with thousands of branches? Imagine the weight of the tree. But there's a root system that just goes deep into the ground that anchors that huge tree down. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, his wisdom made it that these branches hold down these trees very, very well. And from the ground, they receive their moisture and so on and feed all the branches. But if what we have in view is a root, Jesse, and then people who are from the house of David called a branch, whether it's in this case Zerubbabel and the Messiah as well. If we have in view a root system and a branches, so a tree has a lot of branches, what's missing from the picture that Tanakh does not refer to in this sort of context. You figure that out because I gave the word away. Tree. The tree isn't there. It's just branches and a root, but the tree is absent because, as it turns out, there are so many thousands of people who are descendants of King David who are eligible to the Messiah if the moment and, more importantly, the generation warrants it. Isaiah 59, verse 19 and 20. So there's nothing there about the Messiah, so I don't know where it comes from. As it turns out, the word Messiah appears in Tanakh 39 times. The word Messiah only appears in a King James Bible in 2 of those times, and that's in Daniel 9, verse 20, verse 25 through 27. And there's a reason why they translate Mashiach as Messiah only there with a capital M. They do it because they're dealing from the bottom of the deck. They're doing it because it's a false shuffle. They're doing it in order to persuade readers who have no access to the original that this is something really different. So you will not find the word Messiah used in a King James Bible in the Jewish scriptures anywhere else. So what you said, I don't know if you're repeating of what a pastor had said to you, but it's just not true. Moreover, when you see these sort of passages that the Davidic house is preserved, the Davidic house is saved, of course, although Zechariah, or in the case of Isaiah, we are speaking about someone contemporaneously of the Davidic house, and you could see that in the context. The context is that gold is donated from Babylon by 3 people. One of them is Tovia, my name. And they're not sure what to do with this money. Can they accept money from Jewish people who are from out of town, from Borough Park? And the crowns are made out of it. So please, please, please read the context. And we have 3 individuals from Bavel, Jews, who are coming with a donation. And the question is, but you didn't move here. You just are, can we take foreign money from Jews? And it ultimately was all they could. And this is a theme in Zechariah, in the latter prophets, in that other questions were asked. Could non-Jews be involved in building the temple? Samaritans, and the answer was no. Only Jewish people can be. So could be involved in the building and part of this enterprise. So this is a very big thing that plays itself out in the latter prophets. Now, what is most striking there is that we are told in the very text that you quoted from that, in fact, in the final picture, in the complete picture, the king will be in his throne, the high priest will be in his throne, and there'll be an Atzah Shalom Beinehem, and there'll be a council of peace between the 2 of them. So in a sense, there is some truth to this, that of course we're looking at Second Temple Davidic dynasty leader and Second Temple high priest leader. And no doubt, this is not just a history of how did it happen in the Second Temple, but this is, of course, you should know that God is going to keep his promise, that if I were to concede everything and say, okay, this is talking about the Messiah, and in a way it is, but it's not talking about the Messiah, but in a way this is about what's going to happen in the future, that would be fine. I mean, I would concede all of that. What you then have is a monumental problem, because if it's true that the king is going to be in his throne and the high priest is going to be in his throne, and they're going to get along well, unlike times in the past when the priests and the kings clashed. There were times when I could think of kings that wiped out priests, and I know you can too. But in fact, they will be Atzah Shalom, means So Eitzah means advice. That means they will be of the same accord. They will not disagree with each other. Does that mean it's the same person? Unless the person has, suffers from multiple personality disorder, it can't be the same person. Else these words become ridiculous. Then it's just mocking Tanakh. That means the very passages that you raised, I didn't, illustrates that Christianity is a false religion, that what Hebrews is consumed with, the book of Hebrews, the epistle to Hebrews, and I'm thinking, of course, of Hebrews 5, and very importantly, 7, 8, really importantly, where it describes Jesus as king and high priest. And this is a big deal to the book of Hebrews. And the book of Hebrews is essentially one book. It's just it's an argument against that seeks to invalidate the Jewish faith. That's all Hebrews is from beginning to end. So if we go with Zechariah 6, and I concede everything you have said, then you must leave the church immediately and embrace the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Judaism must become your faith and your only faith. And you must do everything in your power to persuade others who are in idolatry to leave it. Because the text doesn't say king, anointed one, doesn't say Mashiach in it. We know who the one who is being instructed to build a temple, go back to Zechariah 3, here 13. And the fact that there would be the priest, the high priest, and the leader from the Davidic house. And Zerubbabel was not a king, but he was a pachas, he was a governor. Things could have changed. Mashiach could have come at that moment, and then Zerubbabel would have been Mashiach at that moment. Of course, it didn't. Why? Beyond the scope of this question. But if we're to concede everything, then what pray tell, does this passage mean that the priest and the king will be the branch will be in one seat and the other, and there'll be Atzas Shalom B'neihem, there will be a Atzas Shalom Tia B'neihem, there will be a Ben Shnehem, there will be that they will both have the same accord, they'll agree with each other. Atzas Shalom Tia Ben Shnehem. That means they're not the same person. I hope that you will consider this and pray about it. Now on to Psalm 110. So in Psalm 110, we have an amazing chapter, one of the shortest chapters in Tanakh, and one of the most exciting chapters in Tanakh. Now, usually in the Jewish scriptures, we frequently have the term Mizmor LeDavid, a song of David. The most famous chapter in Tanakh is Psalm 23, right? Mizmor LeDavid, a song of David. But as it turns out, if you look at the English translations of Psalm 110, you would think that that's what it said, but it doesn't. But the Christian Bibles hide that, and they do it well. The Christian Bibles, instead of saying Mizmor LeDavid, as in Psalm 23 and a whole host of other psalms, begin with LeDavid Mizmor, to David a song. Oh, that's interesting. Means, what's the difference between a song of David and to David a song? Right? So one is Mizmor LeDavid, and we have more than 30 times where that occurs. And then imagine just take those two Hebrew words and reverse them. What does that do when you reverse it? My friends, my friends, my friends, wake up. Time is running short. There's not much more time left, I don't think. Shem is doing this slowly and giving us signs so that we should repent. But you have to ask the question is why do the Christian Bibles translate the words, whether they're reversed or not reversed, the same way? And what does that do to you sitting in your Baptist pew? You don't have a chance. So the David Mizmar is different. I mean, the song to David, and this was authored by David, but it is written as the liturgy that was sung by the Levites in the Beis Hamikdash in the temple. And therefore, when they say the David Mizmar Nom Hashem, Ladoni Shev Liyamini, when they say so the word La'adoni, so the Lord said to my master, that's what it really says. But La'adoni always conveys that the person who is spoken to is a human being, is mortal. It's never speaking about the divine. Never, never, never. And in fact, only my listeners who live in the land of Israel will know this, as some Americans who spend time in Israel know. Now, right now, I'm living under a quarantine. I can't go out of my house more than I'm fine, thank God, fine. But no matter whether you're fine or not, you can't leave your home within. You can only go out of your house 100 meters. That's it. So I'm not interacting with many people at all. This is would be a very dangerous time to interact with anyone. But everyone living in the land of Israel knows that if you are going shopping, going out, I'm probably called Adoni 10 to 20 or 30 times a day. Adoni, Matorotse. Adoni literally means my master, but it's like sir, it's like, it's the way you're buying, if you're buying cake at the bakery. Adoni Matorotse. So it means my master, but it's just part of conventional Hebrew, meaning sir. It literally means my master, but it doesn't literally mean that. And that happens. It just so in Tanakh, Adoni, that means with the chirik at the end, that always means someone mortal, not God. And the Christian Bibles, not all, not every one of them, but most of them lower themselves and engage in a manipulation of the text. And Christians are done. They're fried. I mean, there are some translations that, like the more modern translations, like the New Revised Standard Version. It's not a Jewish translation. Metzger he's dead, but he was a devout Christian. But he says, the Lord said to my master, or to my, I think in the NRSV, it's translated as the Lord said to my Lord, but it's a lowercase l, indicating that that's not divine. But I want to get to the part that you're most interested in, and that is that in fact this anointed one is given is bestowed with the ability to destroy his enemies on the battlefield. You'll see that at the end of the chapter, but the verse you're interested in, the Lord made his promise, he will never revoke it, that you are a priest according to Melchizedek. You are a priest according to Melchizedek. What does that mean, as opposed to a priest of Aaron? So, as it turns out, the word Kohen, if it's in our vernacular, conventionally, the word Kohen would mean a priest. It would mean someone from the house of Aaron. If there was no modifier there, if I say that guy's a Kohen, I mean that he is a priest and a direct descendant, son after son, from Aaron, the brother of Moses. I am one of those people. But whenever the modification is put here, and I want you to know what kind of priest it is, then it's totally different. A priest, according to Melchizedek, is something entirely different. Melchizedek was a royal name for Shem, the son of Noah, who was the only other righteous person during the time of Abraham. He was a contemporary of Abraham. He, in fact, lived so long that Jacob mourned his death when Jacob was 59 years old. And when Abraham defeated the kings, 4 kings, and you can see why the 4 enemies would come up again and again, and he took no booty, he took nothing for himself, and he rescued Lot, his nephew. In chapter 14 of Genesis, Melchizedek gives him bread and wine and blesses him, which means is that you have Noah, who was a righteous person. You have Shem, who was the child of Noah that was loyal and therefore carried the torch, and now he's giving that torch over to Abraham. The word Kohen, I know it translates priest, and it's okay to do that, but the word Kohen means lechahen. Lechahen means to hold office. That's what it really means. And you can hold office without being a priest. You can hold office by being David and being blessed with the blessings that were given to Noah and Melchizedek and passed on. And remember, these words are recited by the Levites in the temple, and they're saying, the Lord said, means God created the heaven and the earth, said to my master, or lowercase l, meaning King David. And it's LeDavid Mizmor. It's not Mizmor LeDavid. In fact, we are told explicitly that the descendants of David were Kohanim in 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 18. So if you don't get the modification, you'll go, what do you mean the sons of David would be our priests? That does not mean that they are priests as in the sense of Aaron, but they are priests in the sense of receiving the blessings of Melchizedek. They hold office. In fact, just not to confuse you, but to clear this all up, because this is the part where I can understand how people can get themselves in trouble. You have even the worshipers and the leaders of the Baal cult that were a nightmare to the Jewish people and inflicted spiritual harm to the children of Israel. They were called the priests of Baal, the Kayane Baal. Does that mean that they were priests too from Aaron, or priests according to Melchizedek? Of course not. So, now why did you come up with this? Because you're sitting in pews in churches and reading King James Bibles and listening to pastors scream from a pulpit and telling you that a translation of Tanakh could be superior to the original. And I guarantee you, it's arrogance, I don't know you, you never read the preface to the King James Version yourself. Just go read it. It's there. Everything I said there. Read it for yourself. So it doesn't say there that the priest from Aaron would be also from the house of David. In fact, that is impossible. You cannot be from the house of David and from a descendant of Aaron. That can't be, or from the house of Aaron. It's impossible because, first of all, only the father can convey what tribe and house you're from. That is only conveyed in a patrilineal line, never through the mother. Now you go, but I thought you're Jewish by your mother. You do, but your tribe identity is only conveyed by the father. How do you know? It says so many times in Tanakh. Very famously in the book of Numbers, chapter 1. Numbers gets that name because it begins with a census of the Jewish people, of the males who are of military age. That number comes out to a total of 603,550 men. And the Torah openly says, "Lemishbechoisam," according you count them according to their families, "Leveis avoisam," according to their father's house. So you can't have a father who's a Kohen like I am, and a father from Yehuda like I don't know Rashi was or Rabbi Gamliel was. These are famous people from the house of David. It just can't be. It isn't. Well, what Hebrews is seeking to do is Jesus just everything. He's a priest. He's the king. He's everything, because there can't be anything else. It's all about Jesus. That's what the whole Christian Bible is about. So I don't mean to embarrass you. I don't mean to say things in a way that is offensive. The idea that you can believe that a translation is superior to an original is this can't possibly make sense. Moreover, the translators, these 47 people, tell us, you don't might take my word for it, they tell us that they relied on the Hebrew for their translation. They told us, you could go online. Now, the reason I read this is I had just years ago, I wanted to read their words. So you can just Google preface the King James Version, okay? And it's a considerable thing. And there's a whole section there on the way they did the translation, and the key is the Septuagint, and that they did not use the Septuagint, and rather they relied on the Hebrew. They're saying that. And that's the church relies on ignorance in order to peddle in this idolatry. Now, I want to say this. Your pastor, whoever he is, maybe he's a really nice person. My guess is he's never read this or considered this. I encourage you to I always say to people, don't trust me, just read it for yourself. All I'm going to do is I'm going to show you your sources. So the word Messiah is not there, as you said in Zechariah 6. The word branch is used simply because there's so many people from the house of David who could sit on the throne of David as king in every generation. During the temple period, the first temple period, there was a king. And there was no king during the second temple because the prophetic period came to an end, and we were under the rulership of Persia initially, and then Greece, and then Rome during the entire second temple period. But now there is someone alive, a man from the house of David who's ready to spring forth to be the anointed leader and heir to the Davidic promise. And there was one 80 years ago, 100 years ago. He died because that generation didn't deserve it. We know from Isaiah 59, verse 19 and 20, that it is only the repentance of the Jews that could trigger the coming of Mashiach. But that means people's repentance is free will, Deuteronomy 30, 15 through 19. And therefore, in every generation, someone has to be there ready to step forward and be the Messiah. If chas v'chalila, the generation does not deserve it, so then that person, whoever he is, from the house of David, dies. Now, when he dies, there has to be somebody else, not a baby. A baby can't lead a nation. It has to be an adult of sorts. It has to be very old. King Solomon became king when he was only 12 years old. But he has to be ready to step forward to take the place of the one who passed away. So these roots have branches. No tree. And it's interesting that Christianity is only tree, no branches, because in the Christian view, it's a tree with no branches, because there's nobody else but Jesus. And Jesus is everything. You understand? So in the Christian view, it's Jesus and nothing, no one else. So it's just tree. But in fact, tree is absent from the literature, from the metaphor, because it's branches. How many branches does a tree have? Well, depends on the species. But what is conveyed is that all these branches flow out from a root, and that's of Jesse. And please God, we are living in a very unique time, and may we merit to see the coming of the true Mashiach, B'mheire b'yameinu, very quickly in our time. Thank you for your question.